All right. So we're going to have all of us are going to have the pleasure of having Sophia Drescher as our presenter. She's our intern, and she has M, a Master's of Divinity, which is really quite an accomplishment from Harvard University, I believe, right?
Right.
And you she's following congregational ministry and chaplaincy. Originally, she comes to us from Silver Spring, Maryland, where she was nurtured at the Cedar Lane UU Church. She received a bachelor's degree in art in religion from New College of Florida. And as she moved to Boston to begin her studies, she acquired and nurtured a passion for UU ministry and chaplaincy, discovered her call to mental health chaplaincy through internships at McLean Hospital and Boston Medical Hospital. Now, take it from here, Sophia. I'd like you, if you wish to introduce more of yourself, tell us, and tell us how you want us to participate or not at your what you said to what you say. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank Great. It's so good to be with you all today. Thank you for coming. Yeah, to be a little more specific about kind of the chaplaincy training, because I think that will help with the foundation of why I'm talking about what I'm talking about today. I did my first and second chaplaincy internships, which we call CPE, or Clinical Pastoral Education. I did my first two at McLean Hospital, then did my third this past summer at Boston Medical Center. So it was a level 1 trauma center and more of a general hospital experience. And now I'm back at McLean doing a very extended part-time unit while I am doing this full-time internship with you all at First Church. There is something particularly compelling that I find in thinking about how spirituality impacts our mental health. And I'm curious, I'd like to start by inviting you to unmute yourself at when you want to speak and just share, when you think about spirituality and mental health, what comes to mind? Um, yeah, I really appreciate that everyone's answers were really like centered in what experiences are here. Because I think that is so important that when we hear the word mental health, that we're connecting it back to ourselves. We're all experiencing mental health stuff, whether good, bad, it's all that label can contain it all. And it's used in a particular way. When we talk about mental health, we can also be pointing to uh, a huge range of experiences. And well, I'll start by sharing where I'm coming from. Uh, it feels like mental health being part of the picture with spirituality was really a big piece of my formation. Mental health impacted me and like struggles with mental health, my depression, sadness, came along with grief when I was going into college and had just lost my dad, and finding a spiritual community in the meditation community at my school was a huge thing. It just gave me a way of connecting more deeply, not just to myself, but to other people, to feel like I wasn't alone in what I was going through. And it wasn't that we always needed to talk about it. And I didn't need to talk about what was going on. I had other places for that. But the sense that there was this thing that we could connect to together, no matter what we were bringing, was really powerful. So that was my like personal experience early on that brought me into kind of a spiritual path of growth and has led me to where I am now and wherever I'm going to go next. Um, but there was also this moment of transitioning into spiritual care and what that was going to look like. And I had it was similar to the light bulb moment I had when I learned about chaplaincy and spiritual care. That I learned that was a thing that you could get trained in and be good at and work with, as a chaplain. And then realizing that that is contained in ministry too. I mean, just big light bulb. And then when I learned that there is training for mental health chaplaincy, I learned that when I was taking a clinical chaplaincy course in my second year of college, at divinity school, and had just decided to do a project on mental health chaplaincy and found out that there is specific training for it. And I knew I needed to learn more. So that led me to finding out that McLean Hospital has the CPE program. And I got to do my first CPE unit, my first chaplaincy training ever in that acute setting, the setting of figuring out what it meant to provide spiritual care to people going through mental health crises. And what that really does is just blows up in like big frame, big like magnifying glass of what is spirituality when we're in crisis, particularly when we're in a mental health crisis, which has a lot of similarities to physical illness crises and other crises in our lives, but also has some particularities that can show up. So my work at McLean relates more broadly to the role of spirituality in our lives and in our mental health, no matter where we lie on that range of mental health experiences. And that's the piece that I kind of want to connect today, that where I'm coming from is bringing this real focus on acute care, but it actually shows a lot. It shows up in our lives all the time. And there's a connection between community and people who are in crisis. And that connection can be confusing and complicated. And so I wanted to bring that in today as well. Something I love about UU communities, and Kathy brought this up right off the bat, is that not everyone is going to identify as spiritual. Not everyone is going to conceive of that word or spirituality the same. So I want to be clear that right now, when I refer to spirituality, I'm coming from what I call a UU perspective, which is kind of a very, or an interfaith chaplain perspective. Both kind of cover this, a very broad sense of what can be contained in that. With the understanding that there is some kind of piece of meaning making that comes from it. And I'm using the word spirituality to encompass both the personal practices that we find helpful, the ways of connecting to the top of the mountain, and the value of community in our lives. Like Rachel pointed out, that spiritual community can also be considered part of our spirituality. I have one more question before I get going with the slides. And this is another one that will just help me kind of understand where I should start and the depth of understanding that would be helpful. I'm wondering what comes to mind when you think about McLean Hospital. But thank you all for sharing. I'm grateful to hear that, and it helps me give a better background and kind of fill in the blanks. As Miriam had said, you're welcome to write questions in the chat, and then she will bring them to my attention if it feels directly relevant. Otherwise, we will cover some at the end. And there will be time for reflections and thoughts and questions. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. And I can see you. I really feel like I figured this Zoom thing. Okay. So this is the presentation that I'm bringing, spirituality and our mental health. It's starting with kind of spirituality and mental health program at McLean, because that's where I started with this. The history of McLean, which we've alluded to. Oh, alluded to a little bit. In really broad history, it was founded in 1811 with MGH. In 1818, it was opened across the river, so in Charlestown, and it was called the Asylum for the Insane. Then in 1895, because of the immense, building that was happening around, it was no longer the kind of scenic, calm space that it had been when it was first built, because it was now a city around them. So they moved to the hill in Belmont and was renamed McLean when they moved here in 1895. And then jumping up to the 1990s, they had quite a significant financial struggle. And I think this is an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to understanding payment and care at McLean. So in the 80s is when psychiatric care shifted dramatically, and pharmacology became the main form of support, or started to become the main form of support for psychiatrists. So it went from talk therapy to being psychiatry, to medication being psychiatry, and talk therapy went to therapy, psychologists. And that division happened, and in the and with that division came a shift in how it was seen with insurance. And so what used to be, and this was already, shifting the kind of care that was provided by the 90s, but nowadays, the way we think about it is that at a general hospital like MGH, the cardiac unit is the highest earning unit because the insurance is known to pay the most for procedures that happen on the cardiac unit. So much so that the cardiac unit pays for some other things that happen at the hospital. One of the things they pay for is the psychiatric unit, because it does not bring in enough money through insurance to cover its existence on a hospital. So when you think about a hospital that is entirely a standalone psychiatric institution, the money part is an ongoing issue, because it's not taken as, it's not considered the same kind of care that insurance considers physical illness care. So, so in the 90s, when Belmont was when McLean was having this kind of crisis, financial crisis, they sold off land. And I know from a conversation I had with somebody recently that that some people at this church were involved on the Belmont side of this. Oh yeah, Jean, okay, there we go. It was a pretty big deal. One of the things that got sold was the land that the chapel was on. And one of the things that got closed also at that time, not only the chapel, but they ended the chaplaincy department. And the chapel is actually still there. You can walk past it. You can look inside it. It's falling apart. They haven't done anything with the chapel or the land it's on, whoever now has it. But it's no longer accessible to us. So the chaplaincy program closed in the 90s, and that kind of went well with the fact that psychiatrists started it coincided with a shift away from spiritual care, like thinking of spiritual care as helpful to psychiatric patients or patients at McLean. Oh. There we go. And then there was a postdoc student named David Rossmarin, who is the picture on the far right there. And he is Jewish and wears a yarmulke. And when he walks around the hospital, um, uh, when he was walking around the hospital as a postdoc, patients started coming up to him and saying, you're spiritual, you're a religious person, I need to talk to you about, I have a big like dilemma, I need to talk to somebody about it. And one person, you know, he's like, no, that's not my role. But it kept happening. And at some point he realized, like, this is a thing that, like, people here want to talk about spirituality. People want to think about spirituality in their care, but how much is that true? How pervasive is that? And so he began researching it. He got a grant to start the research program, and it became what it is today, which is the Spirituality and Mental Health Program. Then in 2018, they were able to philanthropically fund a chaplaincy department to begin, so doing direct care. In 2019, they hired Reverend Angelica Zolfrank, who's the picture to the left, who has been a chaplain for over 20 years, was at Mass General Hospital, was at Yale New Haven Hospital, and is a Lutheran pastor. And in her first year, she visited 1,200 patients, all on her own, just her. And in this year, we visited 2,000 patients, and we have had 2,300 patients who attended spirituality groups. Going back to kind of what it is now with the payer mix, there are some self-pay residential programs that are more long-term, including Appleton, which is a, mainly a psychosis residential program, and the OCDI, which is the Obsessive Compulsive Disorder Institute, OCDI Junior, which is for younger people. But many of the units are acute inpatient units that are insurance paid. And that changes the demographic of who are the main patients in McLean. And it means that a lot more people can use the care, and there's a lot more people can use the care. And then in 2021, fall 2021, the CPE program, the chaplain training program, began. And I was in the first full-time summer unit in the summer of 2022, and then the fall of 2022, and then now. So it's been at the beginning. We're still seeing what this is like. But I can say from my experience, between the first CPE program that I did, the second CPE program ever that existed at McLean, and now, the amount of understanding of the importance of spiritually integrated evidence-based care is astounding. It is just, there's so many more doctors who want to refer patients to a chaplain, who ask, is spirituality important to you? Even if it doesn't come up, they'll integrate it into the care, and they feel like that's valuable because they've seen it work. So why is this important for our community to know about? Well, here are some numbers that come from research done at the Spirituality and Mental Health Program at McLean, and all these sources are on the next slide. So there's research that found that church involvement leads to a 5-fold decrease in suicidality. That's life-saving care. There's a 20% reduction in relapse of substance use disorder. Before the pandemic, and this is why it's important right now to know, this is a hard reality, but before the pandemic, 1 in 4 people considered suicide. So that's not saying suicidality. Suicidality is a little more intent-based, but considered suicide. And now it's 1 in 2. The reason I think it's important for our community to know is that this is a justice issue. and we're justice oriented. This is a justice issue because people who are at McLean want community. They are wanting to be able to be in a place where they can bring themselves, whatever that means. And if they're, safe, and if they're everything, they need is their needs are being met, that they can be part of a community and be welcome. And what they face is stigma. And it's really hard to fill that gap, to be a bridge. And I think this community in particular is well suited to offer that. And I think we do. I think we already do. This is a place of personal and communal spiritual support and growth. So there is a piece of this, these numbers, that is, why is it important to have a church community, a spiritual community, a place that you can go and ask these questions and not be judged, a place where people are looking out for you in a different way. But it's also a place of personal growth, a place where we are working on our own tools all the time, our own spiritual coping skills, like we call them in the chaplaincy world. And we support each other in that growth too, in exploring what that means and what that can mean. And another important piece is that we serve all ages. And this means that we have to continue always to grow our awareness of the mental health risks of different age groups and different life transitions, and the spiritual resources that can support us. So constantly looking and understanding more of what's out there. And this can come down to small, like really practical things like the Insight Meditation app, or the Calm, things that that can give us that little support, but that are changing often and constantly kind of finding new things. Something that is always, that I have on my phone that I really love, is the Plum Village app. And that's the Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village Monastery in France. And they have an app, and it has so many resources. The other important part about framing our support from a spiritual lens, so we're a community that can support, but why is it important that it's from a spiritual lens? And that is because it helps us understand the boundaries of our support abilities. And I think that's really, really helpful, because we're not mental health clinicians at a clinic or a hospital. We do have mental health clinicians in our church, which is not so common in churches more broadly. And I think that says a lot about who we are as a community, and the differences that we can bring of spiritual understanding.
Sophia,
Yeah.
there's a question of these statistics, about the 5-fold decrease, the 20% reduction, etc. Are we talking about the general U.S. population or the population in facilities like McLean's, or what population are we talking about?
The before the pandemic one is general US population. Pretty sure US. Yeah. And the two other ones are specific to people in acute care environment. So people who are at highest risk for suicidality have a 5-fold decrease by being connected to a church. It's really stunning to me. Like, that number, every time I look at it, just blows me away. Because it's not about like what does the church do like that supports you. It's just simply having the community. Yeah, any other questions? Is that okay? So we have these boundaries that we're not mental health clinicians in a clinic or hospital, but what we can provide is support for getting help from clinicians and community and spiritual support. We can think of it like any other illness, right? If someone with diabetes is stable, we support them by noticing if their well-being seems to change, or if they ask for help. And similarly, if they have a diabetic emergency, we help them get professional care. kind of that awareness that comes when we're with other people in community and consider each other important and our well-being important. I also want to say that we do this well. We have, this shows up, this kind of spiritual care from us and mental health care and support shows up in the fact that we have these big choirs that people are part of, small group ministry, the adult programs. Super is a huge one. That's a great moment of every week to touch base, to see how people are doing. The way we greet one another on Sunday mornings. Our time for sharing candles and the follow-ups that happen in coffee hour. I think it's incredible to think about. If I come into church and I'm handed an order of service and I say, I didn't get any sleep last night, which is a huge thing for mental health, sleep. I didn't get any sleep last night. And someone says, oh, I'm so glad you're here. How are you doing? That simple interaction can mean the difference between feeling like I didn't get any sleep and I am isolated and alone with it. Or I didn't get any sleep, but I have someone who cares, who thinks I matter still, even if I come and I'm like a little disheveled or don't really know what's going on. I see, as I said before, I see so many patients in McLean who long for community, but are afraid of stigma. And I think it's important to notice what we do well, which is a lot, and to grow our awareness of how stigma may show up when we don't even realize it. So some of the things that we can do as individuals, we might, I don't know, ask the kids in our lives about their emotions and normalize that conversation. Do you know, like, that is helping tremendously just by asking people, anyone, but especially young people who are trying to figure out how to regulate their emotions. And you can model it too by talking about your own emotions and your process of regulation. If we can be a community that doesn't take things personally when you want so badly to help someone, but they don't want it. I can tell you a million examples of walking into someone's room, knowing that they would just be so helped if they were okay with talking, or just having me sit with them, or having anyone just be with them, and they say, no, go away. Or, what are you trying to tell me that religion's going to fix everything? Or I'm alone, I don't want any help, I'm fine. And as soon as I take that personally, then there's trouble. Because it's not. It's so much what's going on, and just the fact that we can give people a chance to connect and the power to say, no, I'm good, I don't want help right now. That actually matters. And it matters that we don't take that personally, because there are so many reasons why someone might not want help. And that comes to like the value of giving time. If we can be a community that gives people our time and simply listens. A big thing that can show up with so easily is with stigma is the language we use. And I think that changes so quickly and often because we're always changing our understanding of how to be with people better and how to respect people better. So something that every clinician uses at McLean and everyone who works in McLean really values is person-centered language. So saying this person, someone with bipolar disorder, or someone experiencing bipolar disorder, someone experiencing schizophrenia. And there's also a piece of that is using diagnostic terms appropriately and inappropriately. And I think that is really nuanced and is something that we just need to figure out together. Because it can be absolutely appropriate to talk about someone's diagnosis if they bring it up and normalize it. Yeah, nothing you did to make that happen. And it's not your fault, you know, but there's also the reality of what we don't know, and being able to kind of just use non-judgmental language for symptoms. Like, that person seems like they're really having they're really sad, instead of jumping to they're depressed. Because the depression is clinical language, and we use it a lot day to day now. And I think there's like a balance between, like, is that helpful? Is that not helpful? But I think often, as much as possible, if we can use human language, just like normal person to person language to describe people, unless it's helpful to include a diagnosis, it's just something to keep in mind that can be the difference between feeling welcoming to somebody and feeling unwelcoming. Something that we already do really well is remind people that they matter to us and to the world. When someone is experiencing despair, which can come from, sadness, despair, these can come from, it's easy to think of it with depression, but anything that impacts how you cope day to day and how your mind is processing things and getting in the way of living, that can create despair. It can make you feel like you're not just alone, but that your existence isn't important anymore. And those things, it can be as simple as listening to someone or saying hello. But if we find ways to remind people that they matter to us and to the world, and I'm using examples of kind of going back and forth, trying to show that this can be an extreme, like for people struggling with mental health challenges or mental illness, and day-to-day experiences and hardships. A big one that I want to mention is to notice demoralization. That's a huge shift. No matter what is happening, whether it's someone who has a history of mental illness or someone you just know is having a hard time. If you notice that someone says, like, I don't know what the point is, or I don't know if it's worth it, this is never going to change, I'm like, this is just always going to be this way, and that demoralization, please let Chris and I know. Chris or I know. Let the minister know that you're worried about someone, because those are the kind of things that are worth checking up on. And if you feel comfortable talking with them, that's great. If you feel comfortable saying, like, oh, do you have support for this right now? That's awesome. But it would also be a good signal to bring in more support. Yes. Oh, no. Okay. That's last one. So I lost my place here. Here we go. Okay, so there's one thing about mental health struggles or mental illness that I have found harder for communities to understand. And that's partially that there's this huge range of mental health issues, and some are situational, like I said, some are in the moment, something is happening, and so sadness is happening, or even depression is caused by a moment, a situation, and that situation will pass. And there's a likelihood that whatever is coming up with it, whatever mental health struggles are happening, will pass too. They might need help in the moment. Situational mental health issues doesn't mean you can get through it alone, or you don't need to see a mental health clinician. But also some are chronic. And that means that there's not going to be, it's not going to go away. And I think it's really hard as people, to witness someone suffer and that it's not gonna go away, that it's gonna keep happening. And there are ways to support still, and there are ways to, envelop them in our love and our community without the expectation that we think you need to get better now, right? In the 60s, cancer was the big C. And there was a lot of stigma and misinformation about it. And people were dying socially before they died physically. And now cancer is considered a chronic illness in some cases, and sometimes it can be well maintained and with treatment and screenings. Similarly, chronic mental illness is really in need of a paradigm shift. People with severe mental illness die socially long before they die physically. That has a tremendous impact on their well-being, their ability to keep going, their ability to keep seeking help. Yet, like physical illness, mental illness can be well maintained, and there are screenings that help people track that help us track people's well-being. But it's a hard thing to live with, and it's a hard thing to be really compassionate about, because we want people to be well mentally. And so how do we support people when their wellness looks different? How can we make this a place where people can have different capacities and different struggles with mental health? And how can we support children and youth and adults in building resilience by ensuring they don't feel alone at all in all that they're holding? And we hold so much. And we can be resilient with each other. And this includes caregivers of friends, family. Caregivers can be some of the people that slip under the radar because they're giving care to somebody. Check in with your caregivers. That's important. So here's the bibliography. If you want to take a picture or a screenshot, you are welcome to. You can also ask me and I'll send them to you after. Not all of these sources were ones I cited, but some of them are ones that the knowledge I pulled from. One of them is this book, which can you see me right now? Am I pinned? So I'll show you this book. It's The Awakened Brain. People find this really accessible, and it's about mental health and spirituality. There's a lot of literature about it, and I did put this in the bibliography. There's a lot of good literature about it, but that one seems to speak to people. So that is what I have. Thank you for going through this with me, and I welcome thoughts and reflections and questions. It would be thoughts that maybe people would be better off if I don't exist. Thoughts that maybe and it would be like that, and the idea that maybe that would be something I should do. I should end my life because it would be the best circumstance for me and other people. So what it doesn't mean is having a plan. And that's like, there's so many distinctions with the word suicide in mental health. Suicidal ideation, suicidality, I think those tend to be the same. Suicidal thoughts. And then plan and intent are always like also a piece of the screening. Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought this up so we could focus a little more on it. So person-centered language, or in clinical realm, we call it patient-centered language, but person-centered language is when you put the person before, you identify the person not as the illness. A really similar thing, like an easy other context that this is used in is talking about right now, there's a shift, or there has been a shift in talking about homeless people. And then it kind of shifted to people experiencing homelessness. And now another language around it is people who are unhoused. So the big distinction between saying homeless people and people who are homeless is saying that actually the person is the important piece, and what they're experiencing is that they're homeless, but they are not in themselves that identity. And so it's saying, you know, a person who has bipolar disorder, it was very common and to say that person's bipolar, that person is bipolar, so like that person is that. And now the shift is saying like that person has that. Constantly trying to figure out, how do we let a person be and not have it be and have these experiences, but not be that as their core identity that we use to refer to them. This also brings up something that I think is helpful. At McLean, diagnoses are not the most important part. It's not, it can be, diagnoses are considered helpful until they are not. So there's so many comorbid illnesses and so many things like symptoms that look similar. The important thing for the doctors think of for diagnosis is this diagnosis helpful in the treatment, in that like it points to a specific treatment. And so often you'll see like in a chart, you know, bipolar affective disorder versus schizoaffective disorder versus psychotic episode, you know, disorder. And so saying like these are the symptoms that are popping up. We're not sure, you know, if a diagnosis is particularly helpful. If it is, here's the diagnosis, but we're still going to contain all of these things as a part of it because there's so much overlap. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
That was